Well, I'm super happy that we just saw the rich text editor being made available. I think it's about 5 releases ago, something where I kind of sort of promised that we were going to make that available as a standalone component. 2.5 years later, here we are. It's finally in the product. I'm super excited about that. But we're not here to talk about client anymore. We're here to talk about permissions. So, well, maybe a quick introduction. I'm Jesper Schulz-Wedde. I'm the engineering manager of the application foundation team. And one of the areas that my team has been working on is permissions. And it's an ongoing story, actually. We've made incremental permissions improvements over the past, I think, 4 or 5 releases or so. So yeah, I'm happy to show you today, kind of in a sort of best-of session, what we have been doing. Yep. And to help me with that, I've got Stig.
Yeah, I'm a software engineer at the application foundation team, and I've been doing a lot of the permissions work.
Yes. All right, behind this you see fasten your seatbelts because we have tried to squeeze everything into 45 minutes. We have pre-recorded some of the demos to really make sure that everything works smoothly. So if you're having problems seeing or something, just move on closer, or or you can watch the recording if it's like too fast or something. Let's jump into it. What do we want to show you today? So first of all, we're going to take a look at composable permissions. Stig is going to start developing a little app for you where we're going to make use of composable permissions to show you how to really, make use of these new features. Then I'm going to talk about inherent permissions, a new way how you can reduce the size of your permission sets. And then Stig is going to continue to work on our little app and show how you can exclude permissions. Then we're going to go over to something else, our implementation of security groups on Business Central environments, how you now can nest these security groups, how you can use security groups within Business Central to ease the administration of Business Central and permission sets, and all of this then leads to the deprecation of user groups, which now are a redundant concept, so we're going to get rid of those. And then finally, we're going to quickly look at how can you actually look into telemetry to make things better. But Stig,
let's get started
on
composable permissions. So first, I just want to recap what a composed permission set is. So a composed permission set is quite simply a permission set that contains permissions from other permission sets. So here we have the example with the blue permission set at the bottom. That includes the permissions of the green permission set and the orange permission set as well. So essentially, you can include other permission sets in your permission set. And let's jump straight into a demo and create a demo app, and then we'll create some different permission sets, and we'll see how we can include those different permission sets in our app. All right, so I'm here in Business Central. I'm going to go to the users page, and we see that we have 2 different users. We have Jesper, which is super. This is the admin user, BC admin. And then we have Jesper here, which is also super. But we want to change that. That's too many permissions to give to a regular user. So we'll create a new permission set from the permission sets page. And we'll do that now by copying the permission set. But we see that we have some options down here. We'll call it my D365 basic. And then we can see we can do a flat permissions copy, a clone, but we actually want to do the copy by reference, which will just include D365 basic. We don't need the notify. And that's it. We've copied the permission set. And now we can go ahead and assign that permission set. So we'll remove super. And then we'll assign my D365 basic with no company. We'll go to permissions, and here we can see that it includes D365 basic. We can expand that and see what other permission sets that include. And then we'll go back, and we'll just verify that now we have those permissions. So we'll sign out and we'll sign in again. And now we see that the permissions have been reduced. So now I think it's time to create our demo app. As we can see, there's nothing installed yet. So let's jump into Visual Studio and actually set up our demo app. First, we wanted to create some data, so we'll create PD data. This is our data table where we'll store important data, and we want to control permissions on this. So we have a key, and we have some data, and this is the data that we want to control permissions on. Then we have our setup table, which might include some setup that we need and stuff like that. We just keep track of whether the feature is active. Not a great design, but we'll go with that. And then we have the logging table, where we'll log some information about the last execution. So that's what we log here. So that's our data. Of course, we're going to need some initialization as well. So we have this PD init code unit, and here we'll set up some initialization code. So all that we do here is basically init a record, set the feature to be active, and then we insert it, which will require insert permission. And then we'll do the logic. So we'll do that in the form of a report. And here we have, at the top, we have some properties that we don't really care about. And then let's look at the on-post report. So first we check if the feature is active, otherwise we activate it. This requires setup and, read and insert. Then we do the process data, which requires permissions to PD data. Then log an event, which requires insert permissions to a logging table. And then we show the data, which requires, again, PD data permissions. And then we have, at last, our admin scenario, which requires PD log read. So actually reading from the log. And just to quickly go through the methods, check active does a get, and then it calls the init app, which we just created in our code unit here. Then it exits. Then the process data simply just insert, I had permissions to insert this, but this would be the data we care about controlling permissions for. And then we log the event, where we just set the last execution and insert that. Showing the data is just throwing a message with the count in PD data. And then showing the last execution is our admin scenario, where we say that you need admin privileges, and then we do a find last, and we do a message showing the last execution. So that's pretty much our app. We'll deploy that. And then we'll try to run it.
Wonder if that will work.
And not surprisingly, we get a permission error. We don't have insert permissions. And that's because we didn't set up permissions in our app. So we're going to go ahead and create some different scenarios for permission sets. We need a user permission set and an admin permission set. So for our user permission set, we'll go ahead and we'll have a snippet here, which gives permissions to read, insert, modify on the PD data. And of course, we want to be able to work with the data on the user. Then it also gives read and insert. We don't really want to give insert, but we have to do it because of the setup. And then for the log table, we just give insert. We want everyone to be able to write to the logs. Then we can go ahead and we can extend this permission set onto basic that we already have assigned to a user. So we'll do an extension to, where we include PD user in D365 basic. And we'll save that. And then we'll create our admin scenario permission set, which is assignable and public, and it also includes PD user permission set. And then we give the rest of the permissions, RIMD, to the two other tables. So we deploy that with the permissions, and now we should see that we are able to run the scenario. So we'll run the demo app again. We get the number of records in the table, as expected, and if we try to run the admin scenario, well, we don't have it assigned, so we get a permission error. How can we then fix that with composable permissions? Well, as we saw, we created this admin scenario that's assignable true. So we can actually go ahead and include that in our permission set. So we'll go to the users page on our admin user. We'll go to Jesper, and we'll go to my D365 basic. And we see here that it now includes PD user permission set, but we don't have the admin one assigned. So if we view the permission set here, we can see that this permission set does not give read permission to the PD log. We can also review the full permissions of my D365 basic and see that it's the same permissions as we defined in our app, that we don't have read permission here. So now we can quite simply include another permission set. So we'll select our admin's permission set, PD admin. And now we created a composed permission set here, where we also have the PD admin permission set included. And this one also includes PD user. So if we view the permissions of this, we'll see that this one defines yes for all of these, and it includes PD user as well. We can also view the permissions in this set. So this is the composed list of permissions. And here we see that we have everything assigned. And now just to verify that we have the permissions, we'll run the demo one more time. And we get the number of records. And now we should be able to run the admin scenario. And we were. So with that, we set up a composed permission set. And we used inclusion of other permission sets to give our user access to more data. But I think we can actually improve our permission sets even further.
Yes, let's take a look at the next thing. I want to talk about inherent permissions. So this is something new that you can start using now. It released with the 2023 Wave 1, the second portion of inherent permissions. And what we're basically trying to do is to give you, the developer, the ability to elevate user permissions in a given code context. What that means is that you can either grant specific permissions for the context of a method, for instance, or you can now also grant it on object level. There might be certain objects where you're simply not interested in controlling permissions. You will now be able to give inherent permissions on these objects, and then they are out of the equation. And what this does is actually it puts the power into the hands of the developer and kind of eases the burden on the administrator. Because the less permissions the administrator needs to manage, well, the easier the administrator's job is, right? And the developer too sometimes just knows, if it's a buffer table or if it's certain types of tables or even code units, reports, and so on and so forth. You don't really need to control permissions on all of these objects. So this is what we're trying to address. So yeah, no longer need to add these to permission sets. And we are hoping that this will give you more clean and comprehensible permission sets. And also what this can potentially do is to improve the stability of critical code paths. So if there is a code path where you absolutely must have these and these permissions, previously, if the system admin somehow forgot to grant you these, you would maybe even not be able to log into the system. Now with this, you can ensure that you always have the right permissions. So let's take our little... Oh, yes, no, this is important. You can only use this on your own objects. So currently, there is no way that you, through a PTE, for instance, can grant permissions through inherent permissions to other apps. And that's, of course, for security reasons. So let's continue to work a little bit here on our demo app. In order to get started here, let's reset a little bit. First of all, I don't want to be an admin anymore. Let's remove that again. No more admin. And next of all, quickly into, you don't need to see this is tiny, but we go into setup data and delete our setup record again, because we want to kind of restart as if the app was newly installed. So deleted the setup record, now it's again like it's freshly installed. So now let's take a look at our permission sets. You remember our PD user permission set? Well, we had this insert permission, for instance, for the setup table. We don't really want to have that, but we needed to give it just for the initialization of our app, right? Else it would fail, as you saw in the first demo. So now if we remove this, just to quickly prove it again. Now, of course, the initialization code would run, and this is what I would consider a critical code path, and you would get a permission error, which is kind of unnecessary. So how do we go about actually sticking to this permission set, but making it work? And this is where our inherent permissions come into play. So we have this init app, and whoever runs it should be able to initialize the app. It doesn't really matter who you are, whether you're a team member or an admin. So we do give the inherent permissions. So everyone in this scope has insert rights. And now, if we try to run our little demo app again, we will succeed. There we go. But that's not all. So now we got rid of this one permission that we no longer need to administer. So that's pretty cool. But there were some others. So let's go back to our permission set here. Oops. Let me open that again. So you see there's also the setup and the log table that we aren't really interested in controlling. We are interested about the data. So if we now reduce our permission set to only have the data permissions that the administrator should control, then how can we get rid of these others? And this is where inherent permissions and metadata come into play. So for a setup table, every user should kind of be able to read from these, right? So we can say inherent entitlements, not so important, but inherent permissions in this case. So now everyone gets to read from this table no matter who you are. And the same kind of goes for log. Here we are interested in controlling who reads from log. That's only the administrator. But everyone should be able to write to log tables, right? So why not just make this object, give it inherent permissions insert, so that you no longer have to control these insert permissions? So if we now go ahead, compile and publish this little app, which takes a minute here. And we now run our demo. You will see, obviously, it still works. That's lucky for us. But the cool part is, if we now go over into our admin role center here, and we open up my permissions, there goes Jesper. See, now if we take a look at our permission set here, pd user ps, and we view what's in there, and now it's only this one permission that we are actually interested in controlling that is still in our permission set, which makes this a much cleaner, much better permission. And if we go into effective permissions, and let's just change the user here and toggle show all objects. So, of course, we want to see that you still have these permissions. So this is something that is actually not yet released, but I think in the next minor update this is going to come. So now if you see at the effective permissions, you'll see that there is actually inherent permissions down here, right? It says source inherent. So you can still see in effective permissions that these users do have permissions to, for instance, insert into log and read from setup. Yeah. So that was kind of what I wanted to show here. So inherent permissions, we have great hopes that this is going to simplify the entire permission system quite dramatically. We've also started using this ourselves just a little bit. This was rather new when it came like very late in the release, these inherent permissions, so we didn't have a whole lot of time for 2023 wave 1. So what Stig here did is that he went into the login permission set and tried to reduce the login permission set just to show you the power of inherent permissions. And I just very, very quickly want to show you what that looks like. So if you, in the latest release, go into permission sets, and you, for instance, pick the login, here, the login permission set, and then we do some drilling, because this is obviously a composed permission set, so it contains many, many small permission sets. So let's go into the system, application edit, and then there should be a view, and then there will be an object, here read. So it's very, very nested. But we started with these system application objects. Now, if we take the first module here, the AAD user management module from the system application. Now, what it looks like in the current releases, there are two permissions. There is a code unit, the API code unit, and a page. Those you might be interested in controlling permissions on. So those are still left. But if you go like one version back, in the version 21.4, and you take a look what it looks like there, you will see that the permission set is just vastly more complex. It has many, many more objects. And you'll find stuff that you would never be able to, never would be interested in controlling, like all of these code units, implementation code units. It's all this thing that previously cluttered the view for the system administrator. He had to kind of, figure out what is this, do we need permissions for these? In reality, there's no point in that. So now we can get rid of these, which I think is a very, very cool feature. So, but what if these permissions that we now provide out of the box, or that the apps provide out of the box, aren't completely right? What should we do about that, Stig?
Yep, that's where exclude from permissions come in. Because what if the permissions that are defined by Microsoft or ISVs are not fine-grained enough for you? What if they include too many permissions? Should you then copy the permission set? No, you'll then end up having to synchronize forever the copied permissions. So instead, what you'll do is use exclude permissions. So the mental model for how exclusion works is that you calculate the list of included permissions, then you calculate the list of excluded permissions, and you subtract those. And then you get the final permission set.
Yeah, so very important, this is not a deny permission. You can subtract from a set, you cannot just say all up, something is forbidden.
Yeah. And excluding entire permission sets is the same principle. You'll just exclude every single permission in that set from the original set. So let's see how we can do that in the product with our app. So we'll go here to the users page again. We'll open up Jesper, view the permissions. And now we see that we actually included the PD user permission set here in D365 Basic. But we can actually exclude the permission still by just adding a new exclude line, and we'll select exclude for all the permissions. And this will effectively remove that permission from the permission set. And just to verify that, we view all permissions and we search for the object, and we see that it's not there anymore. So we now effectively removed it from the permission set. Because of how we structured it, we can also do it in another way, because we can actually just exclude the entire permission set. So here, PD users permissions, we can just press exclude on that, and then you see a new exclude line over here, and you see that basic is now partial because this is excluded. And just to verify that the user no longer have permission, we'll try to run the demo app, and we get a permission error. So this is pretty much the way that you can exclude any permission from an existing permission set, and it gives a lot of power to you in order, instead of having to create your own permission sets that are based on other permission sets, you can use the original permission sets and just modify them a bit to your liking. Furthermore, we also introduced in Wave 2 of Business Central 2022, we also introduced exclude from wildcard permission. And this is a very powerful feature because it allows you to exclude objects such as pages and reports from permission sets that include wildcard permissions. So now you can effectively, it gives you more power because you can effectively grant everything, as most of our permission sets do for execute permission. You can grant everything, and then you can say accept this one and accept this one. So it's a new way of controlling permissions. And I think that's it for that.
All right, so switching over to a different topic. Security groups on Business Central environments. We've tried to make the entire administration part of permissions easier, maybe especially for larger companies that have multiple environments. So what we've done is that we have improved the update users from Microsoft 365 action on the users page, which now respects if you set a security group on a Business Central environment. Previously, if you would sync, it would just sync all the users and disregard the setup of security groups on your environment. So this actually empowers you to set up the system prior to user login. Previously, the users had to log in to get created. And basically what we do is we just iterate over the users which belong to a security group. So what does that look like? In Business Central, we have a couple of users. And let's go over here and let's try to set a environment, a security group here. So if you want to have a security group, you need to create one first. So let's go over to Active Teams and Groups. And over here, you'll find a little button called security. And we can say add security group and pick the security option here. Then we give it a name. Let's, for instance, call it BC Access, because this is a group where we'll add the users that should have access to our particular environment. And we say create group. And then after a second, we have our security group. And we can now add a user to it. We go to members. We say view all. And then we say add members. This list takes a little bit of time to load because we have a lot of users in this environment. But once it's loaded, we are free to pick all the users that we'd like to have added to this group. In this case, it doesn't really matter which one we take. Let's take the full user admin as the one user that we want to have left on our environment that can access it. And we click save. And again, this takes just a little bit of time. And we now have a full user admin in our access group. Now we can go back to our admin center, and I just quickly need to refresh this by clicking on environments, and we can go back in our production environment, and now we can define the user security group. And we pick our BC access. And what we've now have done is that now only users in BC access will be able to access. And if we now do the update, what it will do now is it will remove the plans from all the ones that are not part of this group. So you see all the other 4 users get removed, or the plans get removed. So now it's only our full user admin that gets to access the system. Yeah, so that was that. One more thing that we did is that we added support for nested security groups. Nested security groups kind of give you the ability to group one security group under another, so that you can have a structure. And again, this very much simplifies the setup and maintenance of security groups, because now you can actually have your, say, Business Central sales group under access, and still allow that group to get access without having without directly being a member of the access group. So let's quickly take a demo on this, because this is easier demo than it is to explain it. So in the meantime, we've created a purchasing group here. And let's also go right ahead and create a sales group. So we create another security group here, which we call sales. So this is, now we have our setup. We have our access group, which is for the environment. And we have our 2 organizational units here, sales and purchasing. And of course, we also need to have some members in this sales group. So let's again go into members and add members. And again, this takes just a little while to load. And again, let's just pick, accountant will do, and the team member. This doesn't really make any sense, but let's take these 2 users just for the fun of it. And now what we can do, if we also want to grant the accountant and the team member access to our environment, is we do not need to add them anymore individually to our access group here. We can just go ahead and add the entire group. So if we say add members, and we now search for sales, you will now be able to add this. You were able to do that before, but Business Central wouldn't care. So you would have to add the individual users to the access group too. You no longer need to do that. So now if we add these 2 groups to our access group, they will still be respected. So by doing that, now we have the full user admin, purchasing, and sales as part of our environment. So now if I go ahead and I update users from Microsoft 365, then when we click on next, this takes a little while, you will see that we will append, just append all 3 of them. We don't want to work with permissions right now. There we go. They will all get a plan again. So now they are back in business, these 3 users that are part of the other 2 groups. All right, that was nested security groups. But we did some more with security groups, right?
Yes, because security groups in Business Central, you can not only use it to control access, you can also control permissions in Business Central using security groups. So we actually integrated security groups right into Business Central, and now it allows you to control permissions using security groups. So this will allow administrators to manage what Business Central permissions you get based on the Azure portal for SaaS or based on Windows groups for on-prem. So effectively, this adds new functionality to control matching of AAD security groups or Windows groups to Business Central permissions. And this will allow you to just move one user from one group to another group and then effectively change their permissions inside Business Central.
Maybe very important to notice that this is optional. You are not forced in any way to use security groups. But if your organization allows you to, or it's good for you, then you can.
Yeah.
So show us what you got.
Yes. So let's jump straight into the demo. And let's go to the new page, security groups. And there we'll create some new security groups. And we're able to select from the security groups we have in AAD. So here I'll select sales, press OK, and that will create it in Business Central. So it'll just take a little while, and then we should have the security group created in Business Central. We'll do the same for the purchasing.
And on-prem, I would see the Windows user groups here?
Yes, exactly.
Great.
So we create that. And here you see the member is already here. BC Essential is part of purchasing. And we can then manage the permissions for the security group. So here I can assign my own permission set for the purchasing group. So my D365 purchasing. And I can do the same for the sales, assign permissions to that security group. My D365 sales. And now you see here the permission sets and the members that are part of that. And then we can go to license configurations to ensure that new users don't get any permissions assigned by default. So any essential user, I don't want them to get any permissions because they get them through the security group. So I'll remove this, blank it out, so that now any new users don't get any permissions assigned directly to them. Then we'll set up a new user with an essential license. It's super quick. Right here. And we'll just assign an essential license to this user. So now this user won't get any permissions in Business Central based on this license, but by adding them to a security group, they get access through that. So we'll add them to the sales group. Find that user. Add it, and now it's part of this security group.
So kind of the entire permission setup was now done inside the admin center rather than in Business Central, if that's what you're going for.
Exactly. So yeah, here we've set it up in Business Central, and now if we go to the users page and we update the users, we should see that we'll synchronize the user.
We don't actually have to do the update. The user would be able to log in just right away, obviously, but this is just to show that it works.
Yeah, so we get the new user here with the plan. So we'll add that user. And then if we look at that user, we see quite interestingly, they get permissions from the security group because they're part of this security group, but the user don't have any permission sets assigned to themselves. But still, we should be able to log in with this user.
Maybe also while this loads, you can make a hybrid where you get certain permissions from security groups and others directly assigned if you're in for like that kind of setup. So it's pretty flexible. Yeah.
And just to go to the vendors page to make sure we have the right permissions. And we see we don't have vendor permissions because we were assigned to the sales security group. So that's the idea of how you can use your groupings in Azure AD or in Windows groups to control how permissions in Business Central are assigned.
Yes. All right.
Yeah.
Getting to the end of this, how does this work on-prem? It works exactly as it does in the cloud, except we have no support for AD security groups. If you think this is important, create a BC idea, and if there are enough votes, then we might be going for it, but out of the box, we don't have it yet. We only support Windows groups. Now, almost the end of the session. With all of these concepts that we introduced today, there is no need anymore for user groups. User groups are part of the base application, so they're anyway falsely positioned, you could say. So we anyway would have had to move them into the system application sooner or later. Also, the concept is simply redundant. Now you can nest permission sets, which was one of the capabilities of user groups. Previously on-prem, you could link user groups to Windows user groups, which you now can do through security groups, which is why this no longer is needed. And while this is sometimes hard for people that are used to stuff and need to relearn things, then I think it's easier for new Business Central users to only have a single concept. So we're going to streamline and simplify the permission management by getting rid of these user groups. And we've done so, obviously, by deprecating. We've tried to make the transition as easy as possible, so we've created a little wizard. So let me just very quickly show you how that works. If you go into users, in this setup you will see we still have plenty of permission sets. And we will also have a user group membership, my full access. Let's remember that one. My full access we got through user groups. So if we now go into user groups in the latest version, you'll get this notification, of course see the user group, and all the permissions that are part of this user group. And you will see the notification that this feature is getting deprecated, and you can actually go ahead and activate that in feature management. Activate the deprecation, that is. So if you do this, we will open a little guide for you, and that guide is gonna help you transition away from user groups, and it should ideally work fully automatically. If it doesn't, we would very much like to hear from you, because this should be painless, ideally. So there are two options. Let me just maximize this. There's assign permissions to members. This takes the flat list of permissions and assigns it to the member, or we can convert to a permission set. If you like user groups, I would actually advise you to use the convert to a permission set, because then the structure of the user group remains intact. So let's go ahead and convert our user group to a permission set. We click finish here. And that's actually all it took. And of course, if you have many user groups, you can convert them all at once. So now we see at our essentials user that there are no more user groups, but there will be a permission set on the user now, which is my full access. And if we go into permissions, the permission sets here, and we look at the, it's actually on top, my full access, it has the exact same structure as the user group used to have. So nothing is really lost. It just now is a permission set rather than a user group. Yeah, that's kind of the gist of that. And of course, if we go into user groups now, after the conversion, there are none left, which is kind of what we went for. So that should hopefully be easy. We've had some questions with what happens on-prem if there are users that are Windows groups and they didn't automatically get created as security groups. This is something that we will look into if we indeed have a bug there. So and if you find other issues that make your life hard, let us know, because we do want to make this painless. One final thing before the first break, we will talk about telemetry.
Yes, we can't have a good session without mentioning telemetry. So, of course, you can use telemetry to troubleshoot your permission issues. If you go to errors and permission errors, then you can see, for example, which customers experience permission issues, what errors do they see, and which apps and objects do these errors come from. So you can use this to look at permission issues and troubleshoot those, but you can also use it to track changes to permissions. So if you look here, you could see which permission sets were changed, and you can track that. You can also look at which apps actually changed these permission sets, and you can even go down and look exactly at when were the different field changes made. So these are the type of things that you can get through App Insights and telemetry for permission sets.
Yeah, that is kind of what we had for you. So we hope that with all of these little features, composable permissions, inherent permissions, exclude from permission sets, all the security group improvements that we've made, and finally the deprecation of user groups, that you now have a toolbox that is just enables you to do better permission management. Because let's just face it, the past 15 years it has been quite the struggle. So we hope that this works. Our next work is obviously to take our own medicine. We do want to start using this to a much higher degree. The biggest problem that we have is obviously the base application, which is just one big spaghetti mess. So using this is very, very hard. So we're going to start using these features as part of our continued componentization efforts of the base application. So you will see this in the center of everything new that we build. And I would encourage you to start using this as well in your apps. It will make your life and the admin's life easier. This is a super difficult topic, and I'm also very happy that you stayed with us here this morning. It's a rough start to the day. But if you have questions later on, how to use that, we're always happy to help. Reach out to us on Yammer. Find me on Twitter. If you still think things are missing, log your ideas. We're very eager to get your feedback there. And if you think, we need to learn much more about this, we're also happy to host office hours. Just let us know what we need to do to make your life with permissions a little bit less painful. Yes, that's what I want to say. And with that, thank you very much for listening. Have a good day.